It began like any other flight. February 16, 1998. China Airlines Flight C.I.676, departing from the warm skies of Bali, Indonesia, bound for Taipei, Taiwan. On board, 182 passengers, 14 crew members. Among them, Captain Kang Long-Lin, 49 years old, over 7,000 hours in the air, confident, experienced, in command. Beside him, First Officer Chiang Der-sheng, 44, competent, but newer to the Airbus A300, only 300 hours in type. Just enough to be trusted, not enough to be certain. The aircraft, an Airbus A300B 4622R, registered B1814. It was not a new machine, but it was strong, familiar, powered by two General Electric CF6 engines, wide-bodied, twin-engine, a workhorse of its generation, not fly-by-wire, no computer safeguards, the kind of aircraft that relied not on systems, but on skill. The flight took off at 15:27 local time. The sky over Bali was calm, the climb was smooth, and for nearly 4 hours the aircraft pressed north across the South China Sea, through dusk into darkness. But in Taipei the weather was changing. Rain moved in, heavy, relentless. A layer of thick cloud clung to the city like a shroud. The winds shifted. Visibility dropped below 1,300 meters. The cloud base fell to just 30, and the approach path into Chiang Kai-shek International Airport, now Taoyuan, became a corridor of uncertainty. Yet the flight continued. At 19:20, Flight CY676 entered Taiwanese airspace. The descent should have begun soon after, but it didn't. The call to start down came late. Only 3 minutes. But 3 minutes is everything when you are flying at 900 kilometers per hour. The aircraft remained high, too high. Inside the cockpit, the pressure grew, quietly. The crew knew they were behind the profile. They knew the weather was deteriorating. And still, they pressed forward. No one said the word "go around." The choice to descend was made. The opportunity to delay passed. They would try to land. This was not yet a tragedy, not yet a mistake, but it was the moment the options narrowed. And from this moment forward, there would be no turning back. They were descending now, but not smoothly. Flight CI-676 had entered the clouds. Rain streaked the cockpit windows. Outside, there was only gray. Inside, the atmosphere had changed, calm, but strained, the kind of stillness that comes not from control, but from concentration, from the knowledge that they were behind and running out of sky. Captain Kang monitored the instruments closely. He said little. His voice, when it came, was flat, clipped, determined. First Officer Chiang tried to keep pace, but his rhythm had slipped. He was still cross-checking frequencies when he should have been calling altitudes, still logging information when they should have been descending faster. And in that narrow space between protocol and pressure, something began to give. Captain Kang took over the radio. He issued the descent clearance himself. It was faster that way, more direct, but it also broke the chain. The cockpit had two voices, and now one of them was fading. In aviation, crew resource management, CRM, is everything. Pilots are trained to share responsibility, to challenge, question, confirm. It is not about rank. It is about balance. But here, the balance had shifted. Chiang, unsettled by an earlier mistake, spoke less. He deferred more. And Kang, perhaps sensing that hesitation, began to act alone. As the aircraft approached 25,000 feet, Kang urged Chiang to make the next call. Chiang hesitated. Kang snapped, "Call it! Now!" Chiang responded quietly. The call was made. But the tone had changed, not just in the words, but in what was left unsaid. And so the descent continued, too fast in some moments, too slow in others. The aircraft was still high, the runway was getting closer, and each correction brought them no closer to stable flight. Checklists were completed, but not always verified. Altitudes were acknowledged, but not compared. Instruments were read, but not cross-checked. At 1945, with the aircraft still above 10,000 feet, Chiang reported their position, but their altitude was already 2,000 feet too high for the distance remaining. The approach was not stabilized, and still they continued. Then came the request for flap extension, early, abrupt, followed by speed brake deployment and immediate retraction. Actions meant to slow the descent, but executed without precision. Kang seemed to be chasing a profile that no longer existed, trying to catch a descent that had already passed its point of recovery. Chiang offered no challenge, no objection, only confirmation. This was no longer coordination. It was improvisation. In poor weather, at night, a cockpit designed for two, now led by one. And the silence in that space spoke more than any warning. They were closer now, beneath the clouds. The city lights, diffused by rain, began to flicker in the distance, but it wasn't time to look outside. Not yet. Inside the cockpit, both pilots focused on the instruments. Screens lit soft amber and green, dials shifting, needles settling, or appearing to. It was then, somewhere below 8,000 feet, that the illusion took hold. The glide slope indicator, part of the aircraft's instrument landing system, came alive. It showed the aircraft below the ideal descent path. A gentle nudge upward would correct the trajectory, or so it seemed. But what neither pilot realized was that it wasn't the real signal. They had captured a false glide slope. It's a rare phenomenon, but not unknown. Radio signals from an instrument landing system can form multiple lobes, ghosts of the real beam, far above the correct angle. And if an aircraft locks onto one of those lobes, it believes it is flying too low, when in fact it is too high. That's what happened here. The aircraft was still well above the proper approach path, but the instruments said otherwise. They suggested a correction, and the autopilot responded by raising the nose. In the cockpit, nothing looked wrong. No alarms, no warnings. Only a shift in pitch, subtle but real. Captain Kang sensed the aircraft climbing too steeply. He countered, pushed gently on the control column. This manual input, a supervisory override, was meant to guide, not command. But when pushed hard enough, it disables the autopilot completely, which it did, silently, no light, no chime. Just one word on the data recorder. Disengaged. The aircraft was now under full manual control, but the crew didn't speak of it. No one called out the change. No one acknowledged the shift. And so the flight continued, with no one truly flying. Then came the go-around. It was a late decision, but not the wrong one. At this altitude, with this instability, it should have been the only one. Kang pressed the button. Thrust increased sharply. The engines roared. But the flight control systems, no longer automated, remained untouched. Flaps full, gear down, nose up, and no one on the controls. The aircraft began to climb, but too quickly, too steep, without guidance. It reached a pitch angle of 30 degrees, then more. In the cabin, the passengers may have felt it, the weight in their chests, the slow tilt backward, a silence that spread as engines surged and the horizon disappeared from the windows. Back in the cockpit, Kang and Chiang were no longer working together. They were trying to keep up with something they no longer controlled. configuration warnings began to sound. Too slow, too high, unstable, but the nose kept rising. The wings heavy with drag, the engines full of thrust, the air no longer moving the way it should. Then came the stall, and from that point on, nothing would be enough. There is a moment in every stall when the aircraft no longer listens, when the air no longer lifts, when the controls go soft, and the Earth begins to return. Flight C.I.676 was no longer climbing. It was not flying forward. It was suspended, just for a second, between thrust and gravity. And then it tipped, the nose high, too high, 42 degrees, the engines screaming at full power. But it wasn't enough. Not with the landing gear still down, not with flaps full, not with airspeed dropping, below 100 knots. In the cockpit, Captain Kang reached for the yoke. Perhaps too late. The stall warning blared. Too low. Terrain. The stick shaker activated. The aircraft shuddered. The systems pleaded for correction. But in that instant, the options had narrowed to one. Fall. The right wing dipped. The nose rolled to the side. What had been a stall became a spin, brief, brutal. The aircraft twisted as it dropped through the rain, and for 11 seconds, there was no control. On the ground, in the quiet edges of Taipei's Songshan district, lights flickered behind curtains. Families sat down to dinner. The air outside was thick with mist, the kind that softens sound and hides what's coming. At 20:47 and 27 seconds, the aircraft descended below 1,000 feet. It was no longer aligned with any runway. The trajectory was uncontrolled. The descent rate had surged over 5,000 feet per minute. No recovery. Kang pushed the nose down. It helped, for a breath. The aircraft leveled briefly, but it was already too close. The engines, still producing maximum thrust, forced the nose high again. Lift broke once more. Chiang's voice returned one last time. A call to pull up. Too low. Pull up. It was a plea more than a command. The ground proximity warning system issued its final cry. And then, impact. The left wing struck the roof of a residential building. A split second later, the fuselage collided with a second. Fuel ignited on contact. The rear section broke apart. The nose disintegrated on a third structure. Flames engulfed everything. Inside those homes were people who had never boarded a plane. Children, parents, neighbors. 7 lives lost instantly. The fire spread quickly, 4 buildings destroyed. Glass turned to smoke. Walls collapsed into themselves. Rescue crews arrived within minutes, but there was little to rescue. The fire burned too hot. The debris field was too vast. The cabin was unrecognizable. No one survived. 196 souls on board. 7 more on the ground. It was over in less than a second, but the silence that followed lasted far longer. And it is from that silence that we try to understand. When the fire finally receded, all that remained was a silence too heavy for words. In the early morning light, smoke lingered in the air above Taipei's northwestern edge. Burnt timbers, twisted aluminum, a child's bicycle, untouched, resting against a scorched garden wall, and, beyond the wreckage, a silence not just of sound, but of certainty. Flight C.I.676 had not simply crashed. It had unraveled, quietly, avoidably, into a tragedy that left no chance for forgiveness, no moment for second thoughts, just questions, and the cold precision of investigation. The black boxes were recovered within hours, beneath layers of debris, battered but intact. One held data, the other, voices. Not frantic, not panicked, just tired, focused, then confused. Investigators listened, again and again. They followed each entry, each transmission. They traced altitudes, vertical speeds, pitch angles. Nothing was hidden. The truth lay not in what had failed, but in what hadn't been said. There was no mechanical fault, no warning from systems, no sign of sabotage. What they found was silence and delay. A descent started late, a misidentified signal, a go-around not fully executed, an autopilot disabled unnoticed, and two voices in the cockpit, only one of which had truly been heard. Captain Kang had flown with confidence, but confidence alone isn't enough. It must be paired with humility, with awareness of what can go wrong, of when to stop, when to ask, when to share command. First Officer Chiang had not been new to flying, but he had been new to this aircraft. And after one mistake, early in descent he had withdrawn. Not physically, but in voice, in presence. He deferred when he should have questioned. He followed when he should have warned. Together, they were experienced. Separately, they were capable. But in that final hour, they were not a crew. They were two men, each navigating alone. From this, the report concluded what many in aviation already feared, that no system, no aircraft, no checklist can overcome a broken conversation. In the years that followed, Taiwan's aviation authority rewrote procedures. Pilots retrained. Crew resource management became more than a module. It became a culture. Instructors taught not just how to fly, but how to speak, and more importantly, how to listen. Today, few remember the flight number, C.I.676. Fewer still can picture the aircraft or its final approach path. But in the quiet circles of air traffic safety, in classrooms and simulators across the world, its story remains.